June 11, 1988. The sun had barely cleared the horizon over N'Djamena International Airport when the cargo ramp of a U.S. Air Force C-5 Galaxy began to lower with a hydraulic groan that echoed across the tarmac. Inside the cavernous belly of the transport aircraft sat two MH-47D Chinook helicopters from Company E, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, their rotor blades folded, their crews already sweating in the African heat. 75 American personnel had just traveled more than 7,000 miles to execute what would become one of the most audacious covert recovery operations of the Cold War. Their target was not a person, not a weapons cache, not intelligence documents. It was a fully armed Soviet Mi-25 Hind attack helicopter, abandoned by Libyan forces 500 miles to the north in the Sahara Desert, sitting exposed at a forsaken airbase called Wadi Daum. The aircraft represented one of Moscow's most advanced rotary wing platforms, a flying tank that had terrorized battlefields from Afghanistan to Nicaragua. Now it sat alone in the sand, waiting to be claimed by whoever reached it first. The Americans intended to ensure it would not be the Libyans or the Soviets. The genesis of Operation Mount Hope III stretched back more than a decade, rooted in the territorial ambitions of Libyan strongman Muammar Gaddafi. After seizing control of Libya in a 1969 coup, Gaddafi had become obsessed with expanding his revolutionary ideology across North and Central Africa. His primary target was the Aviation Strip, a barren, mineral-rich stretch of contested land along Libya's southern border that had become part of Chad following its independence from France in 1960. Throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Gaddafi funneled arms, money, and eventually thousands of Libyan troops into Chad, backing various rebel factions in a protracted proxy conflict designed to destabilize the Chadian government and secure the Aviation Strip for Libya. By 1986, Libyan forces had established a significant military presence in northern Chad, constructing fortified bases complete with minefields, armor, artillery, and air assets. Wadi Daum in particular had become a strategic linchpin for Libyan operations, defended by more than 5,000 troops and protected by extensive minefields. The base housed tanks, armored personnel carriers, and multiple aircraft, including several Mi-24 and Mi-25 Hind attack helicopters, formidable machines that could deliver devastating firepower while transporting up to 8 soldiers in their armored fuselages. Gaddafi's forces had reason to feel confident. The Libyan military was equipped with billions of dollars worth of Soviet hardware, including T-55 and T-62 main battle tanks, BMP infantry fighting vehicles, ZSU-23-4 Shilka self-propelled anti-aircraft systems, and a fleet of Hinds that had proven their lethality in multiple theaters. The Chadian military, by contrast, appeared hopelessly outmatched, possessing limited heavy weaponry, no armor to speak of, and virtually no air power. Libyan commanders viewed the conflict as little more than a policing action, a foregone conclusion in which superior firepower would inevitably crush a ragtag opposition force operating out of pickup trucks. This arrogance would prove catastrophic. In December 1986, the Transitional Government of National Unity, a Libyan-backed rebel umbrella organization, turned against Gaddafi after growing frustrated with his attempts to undermine its leadership and his failure to provide economic support. Chad's President Hissène Habré seized the opportunity to launch a counteroffensive aimed at expelling Libyan forces from his country entirely. What followed became known as the Toyota War, a conflict in which Chadian forces, mounted in hundreds of Toyota Hilux and Land Cruiser pickup trucks and armed with Milan anti-tank guided missiles provided by France, executed a series of lightning-fast, highly mobile strikes against fixed Libyan positions. On January 2, 1987, 3,000 Chadian soldiers maneuvered their Toyota-mounted columns to the high ground surrounding the Libyan communications base at Fada. The assault was devastating. Libyan forces, accustomed to conventional engagements where armor and air support dictated outcomes, found themselves unable to respond effectively to the speed and agility of the Chadian raiders. The Toyotas would race in, fire Milan missiles at Soviet-made tanks from beyond effective return fire range, then disappear into the desert before air support could be scrambled. At Fada, the Libyans lost more than 700 men killed and another 100 taken prisoner. The Chadians captured tanks, armored vehicles, and substantial ammunition stores. Gaddafi, stunned by the defeat, recalled all army reservists and deployed 11,000 troops to Chad by March 1987, determined to crush what he viewed as an impudent insurrection. It would not be enough. On March 22, 1987, Chadian forces attacked Wadi Daum itself, the heart of Libya's military infrastructure in Chad. Despite the base's 5,000 defenders, extensive minefields, and heavy weaponry, the assault succeeded. Libyan troops, panicked by the speed and ferocity of the Chadian attack, fled through their own minefields, suffering horrific casualties. Many abandoned their posts entirely, leaving behind operational tanks, artillery pieces, trucks, and aircraft. Among the equipment left behind were multiple Mi-24 and Mi-25 Hind attack helicopters, some damaged by small arms fire, others largely intact. The United States had been monitoring the conflict closely. The Central Intelligence Agency maintained a significant presence in Chad, providing intelligence support and coordinating the delivery of American military aid, including the FIM-92 Stinger shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles that had proven decisive in Afghanistan. When reports reached Langley that multiple Hinds had been abandoned at Wadi Daum, interest was immediate and intense. The Hind represented one of the Soviet Union's most sophisticated combat helicopters, a design that had entered service in the early 1970s and had since been deployed in Afghanistan, Angola, Nicaragua, and the Iran-Iraq War. Western intelligence agencies had been desperate to acquire an intact example for detailed technical exploitation, a process known as Foreign Materiel Exploitation, or FME. Understanding the Hind's capabilities, weaknesses, avionics, armor composition, and weapons systems could provide critical insights that would inform countermeasures, tactics, and the development of Western attack helicopter doctrines. The opportunity to acquire a Hind directly from a battlefield, complete with its full weapons loadout and operational systems, was unprecedented. Negotiations began immediately, but they were complicated by political sensitivities. Habra had no interest in being publicly seen delivering Soviet military hardware to the Americans, fearing it would undermine his standing with non-aligned nations and potentially provoke further Libyan aggression. The French, who maintained a significant military presence in Chad and had provided critical air support during the Tuota War, also needed to be consulted. After months of delicate diplomacy, an agreement was reached in early 1988. The United States would be permitted to recover one Mi-25 Hind from Wadi Daum, but the operation would have to be conducted covertly, with minimal Chadian involvement, and executed swiftly to avoid detection by Libyan forces who still controlled territory north of the Ayyuzu Strip. The Americans reportedly sweetened the deal with a $2 million payment and a shipment of additional Stinger missiles. The mission was designated Operation Mount Hope III, and responsibility for its execution was assigned to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, a unit that had been formed in 1981 specifically to provide helicopter support for America's most sensitive special operations missions. The 160th SOAR, known as the Night Stalkers, had been created in the aftermath of Operation Eagle Claw, the failed 1980 attempt to rescue American hostages held in Iran, a debacle that had been hampered in part by inadequate helicopter support and poor coordination between air and ground elements. The Night Stalkers were trained to operate in conditions where conventional aviation units could not, flying at night at low altitudes over hostile terrain, often without external navigation aids, and delivering special operations forces precisely on target regardless of weather or enemy activity. By 1988, the unit had already participated in the invasion of Grenada and various classified missions, but Operation Mount Hope III would represent a new challenge. A long-range, deep-penetration recovery mission conducted in one of the harshest environments on Earth, with minimal support infrastructure and the constant threat of Libyan interdiction. The aircraft selected for the mission was the MH-47D Chinook, a tandem-rotor heavy-lift helicopter that had been in service with the U.S. Army since the 1960s. The MH-47D variant was a highly modified special operations platform, equipped with upgraded avionics, terrain-following radar, infrared suppression systems, and provisions for extended-range fuel tanks. The Chinook could lift more than 10,000 kilograms externally using its triple-hook cargo suspension system, a capability that would be essential for sling-loading the Hind, which weighed approximately 8,340 kilograms empty. Before the mission could proceed, the 160th SOAR needed to verify that the operation was even feasible. In March 1988, the unit conducted a written study, possibly designated Operation Mount Hope, which analyzed fuel consumption rates, lift capacities, flight profiles, and environmental factors. The study concluded that an MH-47D could lift a Hind and still carry sufficient fuel to complete the mission, provided refueling points were established along the route. In April 1988, the night Stalkers conducted a full-dress rehearsal at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, designated Mount Hope II. Two MH-47DS were loaded aboard a C-5 Galaxy at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and flown to White Sands, simulating the deployment to Chad. The helicopters were then offloaded, and the crews executed a 490-mile round-trip flight to a mock target site, with one Chinook carrying 6 collapsible fuel bladders, known as blivets, filled with water to simulate the weight of the Hind. The mission profile included 2 stops at forward arming and refueling points, or FARPs, established by a C-130 Hercules transport aircraft. The early model MH-47DS used in the operation lacked in-flight refueling probes, making these ground-based FARPs essential. The rehearsal was successful, confirming that the mission could be executed within acceptable risk parameters. On May 21, 1988, the U.S. military formally authorized the execution of Operation Mount Hope III. An advance party departed for Germany and then proceeded to N'Djamena to coordinate with French military personnel and prepare the forward operating base. On June 10, 1988, the main force deployed from Fort Campbell aboard a C-5 Galaxy, carrying 2 MH-47D Chinooks and approximately 75 personnel. The composition of the task force remained partially classified, with names and unit affiliations redacted in declassified documents, but it almost certainly included pilots and crew chiefs from the 160th SOAR, U.S. Air Force pararescuemen, a flight surgeon, and possibly operators from classified special missions units such as Delta Force. The C-5 touched down at N'Djamena International Airport in the early hours of June 11, and the offload began immediately. The MH-47DS were reassembled, their rotor blades unfolded, engines tested, and cargo rigging inspected. Meanwhile, a U.S. Air Force C-130 Hercules had already departed for the interior, tasked with establishing 2 FARPs along the route to Wadi Daum, one at Faya Largo and another at Mausaro. These sites would provide critical refueling stations, each stocked with hundreds of gallons of JP-8 jet fuel delivered in tactical bladders. The mission brief was straightforward in concept but fraught with danger in execution. The 2 MH-47DS would fly nearly 500 miles north from N'Djamena to Wadi Daum, navigating by terrain-following radar and night vision systems to avoid detection. Upon arrival, one Chinook would use its triple-hook suspension system to sling-load the Mi-25, which had been prepared for transport by American and French personnel who had been salvaging equipment from Wadi Daum for months. The helicopters would then return to N'Djamena, stopping at the 2 FARPs to refuel. The entire operation would have to be completed in less than 72 hours to minimize exposure and avoid Libyan detection. Intelligence reports indicated increased Libyan activity near the Aviation Strip, and there was concern that Gaddafi might order airstrikes on Wadi Daum to destroy abandoned equipment, as he had done previously. The Americans would be operating in a narrow window of opportunity, racing against time, fuel reserves, and enemy awareness. At mid-morning on June 11, the 2 MH-47DS lifted off from N'Djamena, accompanied by a French escort that included Mirage F-1 fighter jets. The French aircraft provided air cover for the initial phase of the flight, a safeguard against any Libyan air activity, but they would not accompany the Chinooks all the way to Wadi Daum. As the helicopters crossed into the Sahara, the landscape below transformed into an endless expanse of sand and rock, devoid of landmarks, settlements, or vegetation. Navigation relied entirely on the MH-47D's onboard systems, with pilots cross-referencing GPS coordinates, inertial navigation units, and terrain maps. The heat was oppressive, with ambient temperatures exceeding 130 degrees Fahrenheit, conditions that reduced engine performance and increased fuel consumption. The air was thin, offering less lift, forcing the pilots to manage power settings carefully to avoid overtaxing the twin Textron Lycoming T55-714A turboshaft engines. The Chinooks flew low, hugging the terrain to avoid radar detection, their crews scanning the horizon for any sign of Libyan patrols or aircraft. After several hours of flight and a stop at the first FARP in Faya Largo, the helicopters approached Wadi Daum. The air base was a desolate, windswept expanse of hardpan and crumbling structures, littered with the detritus of Libya's hasty retreat. Burned-out tanks sat rusting in the sun, their turrets blown off by internal explosions. Craters pockmarked the runway, evidence of the ferocious Chadian assault, and in the center of the base, carefully concealed beneath camouflage netting, sat the Mi-25 Hind. The helicopter was largely intact, its stub wings still mounted with weapons pylons, its nose turret housing a 4-barrel Yakashev Borzov Yak-B 12.7mm rotary cannon. Small arms fire had punctured the fuselage in several places, but the damage was superficial. The aircraft's main rotor blades had been removed and stowed, and its landing gear appeared intact. American and French salvage teams had already conducted preliminary inspections, confirming that the Hind could be safely lifted. The night Stalkers moved quickly. Ground crews attached rigging straps to the Mi-25's fuselage, connecting them to the center cargo hook on one of the MH-47DS. The Chinook's engines roared as the pilot applied power, slowly lifting the Hind off the ground. The helicopter's weight, combined with the external load, brought the Chinook close to its maximum lift capacity, but the aircraft held steady. The second MH-47D circled overhead, providing overwatch and ready to assist if needed. With the Mi-25 secured beneath the lead Chinook, the American task force began its return flight to N'Djamena. The journey back was tense. The Chinook carrying the Hind flew more slowly than usual, its engines laboring under the additional weight, consuming fuel at an accelerated rate. The crew maintained constant communication with the C-130 at the FARP sites, confirming fuel availability and coordinating arrival times. As the helicopters crossed back into central Chad, they encountered a massive sandstorm, a wall of dust and wind that reduced visibility to near zero. The pilots slowed to less than 50 miles per hour, maintaining visual contact with each other as they navigated through the storm. Sand infiltrated every crevice of the aircraft, clogging filters, abrading rotor blades, and coding instruments. The crews pressed on, trusting their training and their machines. After more than 20 minutes, the helicopters emerged from the storm and continued toward N'Djamena, stopping once more at Mausaro to refuel before completing the final leg of the flight. When the MH-47DS touched down at N'Djamena International Airport, the sandstorm had followed them. The crews were forced to remain in their cockpits for more than 20 minutes, waiting for the winds to subside before they could safely disembark and begin loading the Hind onto a waiting C-5 Galaxy. The Mi-25 was carefully secured in the transport's cargo bay, followed by the two Chinooks, which were disassembled and loaded onto a second C-5. In total, the American task force had spent fewer than 70 hours in Chad. On June 13, 1988, both C-5s departed N'Djamena and flew back to the United States, carrying their prize. The Mi-25 was delivered to a classified facility, likely the Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where it was subjected to exhaustive analysis. Engineers disassembled the aircraft, examining its armor composition, hydraulic systems, rotor blade construction, and avionics. The Hind's titanium and steel armor plating, designed to withstand 12.7mm rounds, was tested against various Western munitions. Its Isotov TV3-117 turboshaft engines were run on test stands to measure performance characteristics. The weapon systems, including the nose-mounted Yak-B rotary cannon and the AT-6 spiral anti-tank missile guidance systems, were reverse-engineered. The intelligence gained from the captured Hind was invaluable. Analysis revealed vulnerabilities in the helicopter's armor, particularly around the engine intakes and tail rotor assembly, information that was disseminated to U.S. forces operating in regions where Hinds were deployed. The Hind's infrared signature generated by its twin engines was mapped, providing data that improved the effectiveness of heat-seeking missiles like the FIM-92 Stinger. The aircraft's handling characteristics, including its tendency to lose lift at high altitudes and in extreme heat, were documented, offering tactical insights for coalition forces who might face Hinds in future conflicts. The Hind's avionics, while sophisticated for their time, were found to be less advanced than comparable Western systems, particularly in terms of night vision and all-weather capability, reinforcing the technological gap between NATO and Warsaw Pact rotary-wing platforms. The captured Mi-25 was eventually transferred to the U.S. Army Aviation Museum at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where it remains on display, a tangible symbol of one of the Cold War's most daring covert operations. For the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Operation Mount Hope III represented a defining moment. The mission demonstrated the unit's ability to conduct long-range, deep-penetration operations in austere environments with minimal support infrastructure. It validated the MH-47D as a heavy-lift platform capable of executing complex special operations missions far beyond the reach of conventional aviation units. The lessons learned during Mount Hope III, particularly regarding FARP operations, long-distance navigation, and operating in extreme heat, were incorporated into the unit's training regimen and would prove critical in subsequent operations. In 1989, the Night Stalkers deployed to Panama during Operation Just Cause, conducting long-range self-deployment flights, including overwater transits, to seize key airfields and support Special Operations Ground Forces. In 1991, MH-47DS from the 160th operated extensively during Operation Desert Storm, conducting deep strikes into Iraq and supporting coalition special forces. The unit has since participated in operations in Somalia, the Balkans, Afghanistan, and Iraq, becoming the U.S. military's premier special operations aviation organization. The broader geopolitical implications of Operation Mount Hope III extended beyond the immediate intelligence windfall. The mission underscored the vulnerability of Soviet-supplied military hardware when operated by forces lacking the training, doctrine, and logistical infrastructure to employ it effectively. Libya's defeat in the Toyota War, culminating in the loss of thousands of troops and billions of dollars worth of equipment, was a humiliation for Gaddafi and by extension for the Soviet Union, which had supplied the weapons and advisors. The fact that the United States was able to covertly extract a Hind from the heart of what had been a Libyan-controlled territory, without detection or interdiction, was a stark demonstration of American technical superiority and operational audacity. Soviet military analysts would have been acutely aware that one of their most advanced helicopter designs was now in American hands, being dissected and analyzed. The psychological impact of such knowledge, the realization that Soviet military technology could be captured and exploited at will, contributed to a growing sense within the Soviet military establishment that the technological gap with the West was widening, not closing. The Hind itself, once a symbol of Soviet military prowess, became a case study in the limitations of Cold War-era weapon systems. While the Mi-24 and Mi-25 were formidable platforms in environments where they faced limited air defense threats, they proved vulnerable to modern man-portable surface-to-air missiles and advanced radar-guided systems. In Afghanistan, Hinds had suffered significant losses to CIA-supplied Stinger missiles wielded by Mujahideen fighters, losses that had forced Soviet and Afghan government forces to alter their tactics. The capture of an intact Hind allowed Western engineers to understand precisely why these helicopters were vulnerable, informing the development of even more effective countermeasures. The knowledge gained from the Wadi Daum Hind contributed to the design of Western attack helicopters like the A-64 Apache, which incorporated lessons about armor placement, engine protection, and survivability features that addressed the Hind's shortcomings. The covert nature of Operation Mount Hope III also highlighted the importance of discretion and political sensitivity in special operations. The mission succeeded not only because of the technical proficiency of the 160th SOAR, but also because of careful diplomatic negotiations that secured Chadian cooperation and French acquiescence. The operation was conducted without public disclosure, allowing Habre to maintain plausible deniability and avoiding a diplomatic crisis with Libya or the Soviet Union. The fact that the mission remained classified for years, with details only emerging gradually through declassified documents and participant accounts, underscored the U.S. government's commitment to protecting intelligence sources and methods. Even today, certain aspects of the operation, including the identities of some participants and the specific intelligence derived from the captured Hind, remain redacted. The legacy of Mount Hope III extends into the present day. The 160th SOAR continues to operate a fleet of MH-47G Chinooks, the latest iteration of the platform that proved its worth in the Sahara in 1988. These aircraft have been upgraded with advanced avionics, in-flight refueling capability, improved defensive systems, and more powerful engines, but the core mission remains unchanged: deliver special operations forces anywhere, anytime, under any conditions. The capture of the Libyan Hind also established a template for future foreign materiel exploitation operations, missions in which the U.S. military has continued to acquire and analyze adversary technology. In recent years, the U.S. has obtained Chinese drones, Russian electronic warfare systems, and Iranian unmanned aerial vehicles, all subjected to the same rigorous analysis that the Wadi Daum Hind underwent. The principle remains constant. Understanding an adversary's technology is essential to countering it, and the best way to understand that technology is to acquire it directly from the battlefield. Muammar Gaddafi never recovered from the humiliation of the Toyota War. The conflict cost Libya an estimated one-tenth of its military, with 7,500 troops killed and more than $1.5 billion in equipment destroyed or captured. The Aouzou Strip remained contested for years, with Libya finally ceding the territory to Chad in 1994 following a ruling by the International Court of Justice. Gaddafi's regime, already isolated internationally due to its support for terrorism and pursuit of weapons of mass destruction, became increasingly brittle. In 2011, following the outbreak of civil war during the Arab Spring, Gaddafi was overthrown and killed by rebel forces supported by NATO airstrikes. Chad's President Hissène Habré, who had authorized the American recovery of the Hind, was himself overthrown in 1990 by his former general, Idriss Déby, one of the architects of the Toyota War victories. Habré fled into exile in Senegal, where he lived for decades before being extradited and convicted by an African Union court in 2016 for crimes against humanity, including the murder of more than 40,000 people during his tenure. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. The Mi-25 Hind recovered during Operation Mount Hope III now resides at the U.S. Army Aviation Museum at Fort Rucker, Alabama, displayed alongside other captured and historical aircraft. Visitors can walk beneath its stub wings, examine its weapons pylons, and read plaques describing its operational history. But the true significance of the helicopter lies not in its physical presence but in what it represents. A moment when American ingenuity, operational audacity, and technological superiority converged to achieve a mission that seemed impossible. A 500-mile flight into hostile territory, conducted under extreme environmental conditions, to recover a multi-ton aircraft and return undetected, all within 70 hours. It was a mission that required precision planning, flawless execution, and unwavering commitment from every participant. And it was a mission that demonstrated once again that the United States military could operate anywhere at any time and accomplish objectives that adversaries believed were beyond reach. The Soviets had built the Hind. The Libyans had abandoned it. But it was the Americans who claimed it, and in doing so, turned an enemy's weapon into an instrument of their own strategic advantage.